Welcome to the Software Process and Measurement Cast number 731. I'm Jon Quigley, your host. Today, the annual Thanksgiving holiday in the U.S. was a few days ago, providing space to reflect and give thanks to everyone involved in the 16-year-plus history of the Software Process and Measurement Cast blog and podcast. There is a lot to be thankful for. This week, we put the spotlight on everyone that makes the SPaMCAST possible. We also have Jon M Quigley, who brings his alpha and omega of product development to the podcast. Jon and I discuss the idea of flow. Thanksgiving and Giving Thanks by Thomas M. Cagley, Jr. Once a year, my brothers, sister, father, and I bring as many of our extended family together as possible to give thanks, celebrate, and reestablish relationships. This tradition has occurred 40 times over the last 42 years. It is like a mini diaspora that has spread across the U.S., returning to trade stories and break bread together. The years have spawned many stories, most of which are of celebration and thanks. The annual Thanksgiving holiday in the U.S. was a few days ago, providing space to reflect and give thanks to everyone involved in the 16-year history of the Software Process and Measurement Cast blog and podcast. There is a lot to be thankful and grateful for. In no particular order, over the past 16 years, a lot of people have agreed to be interviewed for the podcast. Every interview has enriched my life. The yardstick I use for judging interviews includes such attributes as aha moments and laughter. There even have been a few interviews that have radically changed the trajectory of my career. I heard the same story from many listeners. Interestingly, everyone has a different interview they point to as being important to them. I am constantly reminded that everyone finds their own path. Listeners and readers are at the heart and soul of the SPaMCAST and blog. Both podcast and blog have spawned a wide range of introductions that have and continue to turn into relationships. I enjoy every interaction with every reader and listener. As an update to one listener's comment, Keith, I'm still working on identifying a new piece of pod-safe music for the podcast. Recently, the 4 current columnists have been answering questions from listeners. More interactions are always better. The columnists have enriched the podcast and blog. The 4 contributors are Jon M Quigley, Susan Parente, Tony Timble, and Jeremy Berriam. As many of you know, each of the columnists and I record 2 columns in a sitting. Those hours are delights, even when we record at 7 a.m. As I thought through writing this column, I listened to quite a few of our conversations over a wide arc of years past and present. Every one of us has evolved our ideas and approaches to delivering value. I'd like to think that was from our interaction. I know it was from my point of view. I may be the voice of the Software Process and Measurement Cast, but I am not the only person involved, directly or indirectly, in delivering the podcast and blog. One or more of Megan Cagley, Matt Williams, Barb Cagley touch every cast and blog. Without their help, everything would suffer immeasurably. I am thankful for the listeners and readers, the interviewees, columnists, and everyone involved in delivering the cast and blog. You have enriched my life. I hope you've gotten even more value than I. Want to be more involved? Leave a voice message at 01-440-668-5717 or email at tcagley@tomcagley.com. Jon M Quigley, welcome to the Software Process and Measurement Cast again.
I like it. How long have we been doing this?
I was thinking about that. It's been a while.
It's a lot of fun. I hope we can do this in, many years from now when we start to get old and gray. I'm hoping we can maybe still knock it out of the park.
Well, at least next week we will. Yeah. Because this face is old and gray already.
Yeah.
Jon,
I'm with you.
From the point of view of your alpha and omega of product development, the word flow is, I don't know. I hear that almost everywhere I go. And I'll be honest with you, I spent a half hour yesterday with a few of the books that I own, and I own a few books, looking for definitions of that word flow. And very frankly, I don't know that I found any that were useful.
That might be a little difficult to come by because it probably depends on a good many things.
How do you define flow?
That's a good question. If I'm in a department, like to say I'm a test group manager or some department like that, then the flow would be how as a manager, the flow that I'm going to be concerned with is how the input what comes into my group and what are the characteristics of that, and what's the expected transformation of that attribute for the output side or the information. In the case of a test group, you would probably need to report what you find, what you should look for to start with, and what is the high risk, what you actually test, and then how you report that to the developers. But when you talk about, that's very limited in context for the flow, right? It's just one department. But generally, that's not how it works. It passes from one place to another, to get stay out. Unless, of course, you're projectized or an agile where your whole team is, maybe Scrum, where your whole team is covers all the things that need to happen. So the flow in that case is actually maybe in one group, right? That makes it a little tough to describe it because it depends on the organization structure, the philosophy of the organization, and a good many other things on just exactly what it looks like. But in general, it's moving some product artifact or product from one place to another.
Okay, I think we get to the crux of the issue right there, right at the end there, where we're describing in general what is flow. Flow is, and I wrote down over here, just from a diagramming point of view, input, transformation, output. Well, that's cool. So it's the movement of stuff from one point to another. That's flow.
Yeah.
Okay.
And that, like you said, it's an input to some place, some transformation of that thing in some way, and then an output of some sort, which might be goes into something else, which is an input to something else, another set of transformation or type of transformation.
Well, and that's why your indication that you have to have that broader picture, right? Many times I think that would be called a value chain or something along those lines.
Right.
But it's interesting. Instead of defining what flow is, we go down a path of describing what the attributes are or how we'll measure it versus how we'll define it. We can do mapping and therefore build the steps in the flow. Is that really what flow is? No, it's a map.
It's a graphical representation of what you think is actually happening.
Of the process
and if you're the only
flow,
yeah, it's a process flow. And if you're the only one drawing it, you're almost certainly going to get it wrong or miss some things.
I'm shocked. What do you mean by that? You mean one person can't know everything?
You might have a good feel or even a good knowledge of how the top level flow of something through a set of departments or a set of groups based on the structure of your specific organization. But when you sit in the shoes of each one of those areas, you'll learn a lot that you did not know as to how the transformation goes, which tells you something about what the input must look like to be able to produce an output that the next group needs. And that's the problem. We sub-optimize. We improve one group. It's like the theory of constraints. We improve one area without considering if that area is actually the thing that disrupts the flow for the entirety.
Well, I think we all see that all the time. All of us
Yeah.
that are in the business of getting something done. So you optimize a piece of a process. And then you look at the end and it's like, oh my God, it didn't translate through. I got 50% greater efficiency, and nothing comes out the other end.
Yeah.
Other than what's been happening.
Or a disaster, or something unexpected and undesirable happens.
A lot of inventory inside.
Right.
Oh,
From a development perspective, we sometimes let's use an example of requirements. Right. The requirements are written in a way just enough so that maybe the developers can produce it. But the thing is, the developers aren't the only one that may use those requirements. The test group is probably going to use, or should at least have, use of those requirements in developing the test scope, test data, test equipment. What is the thing supposed to do, and how should I make sure that it actually does that? And in some companies, I've worked at companies where the requirements documents, the engineering ease, is translated into something that goes into the aftermarket, right? So this very detailed explanation of a product is converted into something that the end customer is going to look at when they're using the product. Okay, it's supposed to do this because the requirements said it. It gets translated into a user kind of thing. If this, then that light should come on if you have a vehicle, right? But sometimes they don't match. If you ever see what your text for your vehicle or your text for your product not mapping exactly to your product, you can maybe wonder if that originated back at the requirements phase. They weren't kept up, or this part was a by word, or we didn't have configuration and change management adapting the product and the documentation to the chain of the flow.
Yeah, that could easily happen, especially in a world where stuff happens and whole supply chains are disrupted.
Right. I've worked at a group where we were expecting something from a department. I can get more specific. Okay. A test group, a vehicle test group, part of that is going to be systems integration. It's got all these other pieces. You test the subassemblies, you test the subsystems, and then you test the actual system as it's deployed. Live fire kind of exercises, right? So in order to do that, to do the systems integration, you need some input from a supplier. What's in this iteration of the hardware and software? We can't tell you. We don't know, or it's something in this iteration. Well, how am I supposed to test this? In fact, I had to take a hard line with this supplier. I said, okay, if you can't tell me what's in each specific iteration, then what my team is going to do is we're going to top-down test this according to all of our specifications and everything that we're expecting that product to do. Everything that the end product should do, we're going to look. It's going to make our test time much longer for each iteration, but okay. So then we start issuing defect reports for things that don't work. And they don't work because they're missing. But they couldn't tell us, don't test this because it's not available yet. Right? So our expectation was that they would be able to tell us what we could test because it's there. And theirs was, you don't really need to know that. After a few reporting defects that are not defects, but software functions that just aren't available because they haven't been written, after looking at the backlog of these defect reports, all of a sudden they have time to try and find ways to articulate what's actually in the product software.
Yeah, I'm sorry. Having been in the software world long enough, the original response was a piece of poo-poo.
Yeah.
Of course they should be able to know. If nothing else, they should be able to know when they start the frickin' iteration, right?
Yeah. And they might have, but it was nothing we could use. They didn't provide us anything we could use for whatever reason.
Yeah, that's a bad relationship.
Yeah, it got a little better. It got a little better because of me and my department digging our heels in and saying,
We
okay,
gotta play.
yeah,
Right.
we're gonna play hard. Then if this is what you want to do, we're gonna make sure we test everything because you can't tell us what's in it. And then you look at the executives looking on your part of the company and our part of the company. You look at the executives saying, "What in the X is going on here?" Because this is terrible. We can't launch this. Then you get pressure from the top to actually start doing something more appropriate.
Jon,
A lot of political entanglements were involved.
Well, understood. I think anytime you get more than 1.5 people in a room, you end up with political entanglements. It's just that's what we call relationships, right?
That's what we call it. Yeah.
And it really is. Jon, the overall idea of flow, it has to be more than just a set of attributes and a set of measures. Don't we have to define that to actually be able to talk about it correctly?
Yeah, I think you do. And I think if you either have to have a general set of these attribute descriptions in some way, or ideally specific based on whatever the project and the product you're working on are, right? So you identify, normally we do it like this, but not this time because of whatever other reason, right? So, for example, one of the places I worked at, I was responsible for mapping the process through the departments, right? It was an automotive firm. Responsible for mapping the process, the flow through it. And I worked with all the departments to get what it is they need from each other department and attributes of it, and what their transformation would look like, what they were going to do to actually turn it into their output product, and then make sure that output product is actually something that transitions well to the next group, right? So the output of this goes into somebody else. You need to make sure you're hitting that target. One of the very first, when I was writing the process documents, when I was working to write the process documents, I wrote most of them, but I put the structure to all of them. And the very first thing is the objective. What is it we're trying to do here? That's the thing that cues you in on what you should be doing. Because sometimes those process docs, they don't apply. Yeah, that's right. Or sometimes the attributes or the things that you're expecting, you don't have, but you still got to find a way to make this transformation best way possible. And if you know what the objective is, then you can make some informed decisions about how to approach it. I can't use the process as documented because I'm missing some pieces, or I don't have time, or I just want to experiment with a better way to do this. If I know the objective, I can do those sort of things.
Super. Jon, how would people continue the conversation about flow with you?
You can connect with me on LinkedIn at Jon M Quigley. You can send me an email at jon.quigley@valuetransforms.com.
In Reread Saturday News, this week, we're taking a break from our reread of Extraordinary Badass Agile Coaching. It never gets old saying badass on the podcast. Link in the show notes to buy a copy of the book and read along, and all 4 entries to date in our reread. In the Software Process and Measurement Cast number 732, we'll feature our interview with Robert Cooke. Robert and I discuss the role of software development in delivering value. If process improvement is a never-ending journey, why do so many people ask, are we there yet?